Greetings, friend, and welcome to the Between the Covers podcast, where we are working every day to remove the self-limiting beliefs that are preventing us from becoming the heroes of our own stories. I am Marcus Spar, and for this month's hero study, I have a very special guest with me. I have here with me from across the pond, I have Michael Marshall, also known as Marsh. And he is a podcaster. He is the editor of the Skeptic magazine and project director of the Good Thinking Society. I have known him. I first learned about him through the God Awful Movies podcast and the myriad libraries that the Puzzle in a Thunderstorm team have. And I've also been listening to him on the Skeptics with a K and the No Rogan experience. And I am incredibly blessed to have someone of Marsh's caliber here with me. So thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, absolute pleasure, Marcus. Thank you for inviting me and for listening to the various different things that I've done over my long and bizarre career in skepticism. Yeah.
Yeah, and uh I don't know how much you've gotten into like my library or anything. I know you're a really busy person. I used to be evangelical Christian, and it wasn't until I think it was like late 2019 was when things really started to not make sense for me
Hmm.
with Christianity and my faith and everything. And I've definitely taken a much more skeptical view to the world, much more curious, not just taking things as they're hand fed to me and everything. And so as soon as I started listening to all of your works and everything, I mean, I've just been so impressed with how you in the Be Reasonable episodes I've listened to, the questions that you ask in order to get these people thinking and looking at these different topics and beliefs from a very different perspective. And I know just how important and healthy skepticism actually is in our day to day. So bringing on like the king of skeptics in my book on here is just it's just, oh, it's so great. Thank you.
Ah, well, yeah, that's so lovely of you to say so, and yeah, be reasonable. That was always something that was a real passion of mine. It's not a show that I do kind of anymore. I haven't formally stopped it, but I find it harder and harder to find people because for anyone who isn't aware, Be Reasonable is a show where I find people that I comprehensively disagree with, but rather than have the kind of conversation that people will often have when they disagree with someone, the kind of Facebook argument, the social media shouting back and forth, the people trying to win a debate and prove each other wrong. I try to just have an open conversation. I say to them, I don't agree with you, but let's kind of figure out why. And I do try and then ask the kinds of questions that show that I have a genuine curiosity. I've got a genuine interest into what's kind of leading people to believe in something that on the face of it, to me at least, looks impossible to be true. And so it's not always a comfortable conversation to listen to, but I think it's maybe more productive than just the kind of the shouting at people about how horrible they are. Even when I have interviewed people who I would say have some pretty horrible views or hold those views for some pretty horrible reasons, I try to kind of get a little bit more in depth behind that. And I'm glad that some people found that a very worthwhile way of engaging with ideas and sort of testing out these ideas and listening to why people believe in stuff that we would all look at and say, well, that can't possibly be true.
Well, and it actually ties into something that I have spoken with many clients about in the past, because we inevitably have, especially we are recording this like in early December right now. You know, we're between Thanksgiving and Christmas, or at least Thanksgiving here in the States.
Hmm.
And it's a lot of people, it's like this is supposed to be the most wonderful time of the year, and it tends to be the most dysregulating, the most difficult and challenging, and we have to navigate oftentimes very difficult conversations with those that we love,
Mm.
not even counting all the people that we just interact with on a random basis. And what you're describing here about just that genuine curiosity, asking these questions, not necessarily trying to come out and say argue, or the whole social media shouting matches that everyone can get into. That's actually something that I have talked with many clients with about how we can have good and constructive conversations without going to the point that we start getting defensive and you're deeply entrenched in your area, I'm entrenched in mine, and while we are communicating, the only thing we're doing is we're saying our next talking point, and then while the other person is saying theirs, we're thinking about what we want to fire back with, and we're
Mm.
not actually listening or engaging with what the other person is saying.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And I think so many people will get into that position. And, I can understand it, especially around particularly emotive subjects, subjects that touch on, matters of your identity or your personal character, especially when it feels like it's an attack on a value set. And it's why the kinds of conversations I have, I try not to come across as an attack. And that'll be if I'm talking to someone who's anti-vax, for example. I've spoken to anti-vaxxers on Be Reasonable in various other parts of my work as well. One of the things I'll always try and do is to see if I can identify where their value set is, and if there's anything positive in that value set, sort of divorced from what they're doing. And I actually think when people look at anti-vaxxers, a lot of people say, well, you're complicit in the murder of children. You're complicit in children getting unwell. You're pro-virus. You're pro-illness. And nobody is those things. None of the people who are anti-vax actually want anybody to get illnesses. They think they're protecting kids. And so what I'll always try and do is to say, look, I understand that what you think you're doing is protecting kids. You value the protection of children. I care about that as well. So if I disagree with you, I'm not disagreeing that that's your intent. Your intent is still good. How do we then achieve the protection of children is the thing we can disagree about. But I can try and divorce it away from that emotive aspect of people feeling like you're saying, you don't believe in vaccines, therefore you're an evil person who wants to kill children. Because you're not going to have any kind of good conversation with somebody if they think you assume them what they want to murder babies. You have to have this kind of conversation at a much more at a much more empathetic level. Now, I also recognize that comes with a huge amount of privilege for me because I will be having conversations with people where it's not my personhood that's on the table. So I wouldn't expect everybody to be able to approach these conversations in the same kind of way. It's much easier when it is in the hypothetical, as it is with me. But I think we just will get to a much better place if we don't assume the worst intentions of somebody until they've confirmed those intentions. And there are people I've spoken to who I would say absolutely have bad intentions, evil intentions, poor motivations, but I gain nothing by assuming that on the way in. You'll always look like the more reasonable person if you have the assumption that this person is arguing in good faith, and then if they want to disabuse you of that assumption, that's kind of up to them.
Yeah, I have a friend and a mentor. His name is Mike McHarg, and he had this podcast called Ask Science Mike, where people would ask him science questions, and then inevitably people start asking him a lot of faith questions.
Mm.
And he says something very similar that's just really stuck with me is if you want to have a conversation and you in particular want to de-escalate it, if it's like starting to amp up and you want to de-escalate it, then you do find that common ground. You do state the inherent goodness about the person and the stance that they have, where using your example with the anti-vaxxers and everything, we can just see that it's like, man, you just don't really care about these kids one bit because you just want to keep these like really good vaccinations from entering their system. And it's like, no, that is putting a judgment of their evil intent upon them when really it is just this good thing that they are trying to protect the children from things that they believe are in fact going to be harming
Yeah.
them.
Yeah, people can be wrong without being evil, and we can sort of divorce their actions from their intentions. And we can say your intentions might have been good, you can still do enormous amounts of harm with good intentions, and that's kind of where we have to try and get into things. But I think when it comes to vaccines in particular, one of the things we should also be sort of willing to talk about is that, especially during COVID, It was very confusing. It was very scary. Things were very heightened, and whenever everything is much more tense and more heightened, people are more likely to cling to simplistic solutions. I spent a lot of time during the pandemic undercover in the groups that were protesting by saying, "I don't think the virus is even real. This is just a lie that the media is telling you, that the government's telling you." And the reason I spent the time undercover there is because we from the outside could have a lot of assumptions about what people in those spaces believe, why they're there, what motivates them to this kind of activism. But actually, if you're there and you're listening to people and having conversations with people in a way that isn't judgmental, you can actually hear what people really think, and that makes you much more effective at being able to say, well, the reason we shouldn't join those activists is this set of things over here. We know what the kind of fears are. But so many people were scared at a scary time. They were looking for answers when there weren't good answers, especially before the vaccine for COVID was available. And these were people in a lot of cases where it wasn't like they could just go and work from home. And the biggest impingement of their life was that they couldn't socialize or see the people they work with, the people they care about. Like, that was hard for all of us, but it was especially hard for people whose livelihoods depended on seeing people face to face, on having cafes and gyms and things that kind of rely on being in the same room as people. And those people saw their livelihoods disappear, their ability to pay their rent or their mortgage disappear. And it's really hard to say. And the reason for that is this almost invisible thing that emerged from a wet market on the other side of the world and is causing deaths at this huge scale. You can't see it, but it's there. It hasn't harmed you yet, but it's there. That's a really hard thing to accept. Whereas it's much easier to go, oh, it's that guy. That's the bad guy. It's the government. And now we can stand up against the government. We can stand together. We're allowed, so we can understand the motivations that lead people into these kind of darker rabbit holes and these darker positions. And once we understand them, we're so much better at being able to help people out of them and preventing people from falling down into them. So yeah, listening is absolutely key. You can't just be spouting your next talking point and switching off until it's your turn to speak again. I don't think you achieve anything that way.
No, you really don't. And I like how you describe that because I do focus a lot on the hero's journey with my examples and helping people become the heroes in their stories. And what you're describing there about being able to put blame of something evil onto someone or onto something like an organization, a
Mm,
country, or whatever it is, then that gives us something we can fight. That gives us something we can stand up against. But if if it is the unknown, then what can we stand up against? And
yeah.
we feel helpless. We feel incredible amounts of fear that it's almost like a part of our being that we have to know what's with us, what's against us. It's that whole tribalism thing that I wish we could just get rid of that. But
Yeah, yeah.
I also understand that's coming from my area of privilege too. But
Yeah, well, I think you're absolutely right. That I think one of the things that is always going to be a motivator for people is whenever you're forced to be passive in the face of something that feels existential, that is never going to feel satisfactory. And so you had a lot of people, the pandemic. What was the incredibly scary thing was killing so many people. What was the advice we were given? Go home, do nothing. Just sit at home, wait it out. Don't see people. Do nothing. Well, do nothing is a terrible solution to offer somebody as they see their life eroding. If it was their livelihood, the jobs the businesses they've worked to build, things like that. That's an incredibly unsatisfactory narrative. I actually went undercover in 2018 to the UK's Flat Earth Convention. I came across the flat Earth as an idea when I was just starting Be Reasonable. In fact, the second episode, I think, of Be Reasonable is with the vice president of the Flat Earth Society. And that's from like 2014, something in that kind of area, maybe slightly around that time, I think it was. And it was at a time when nobody had heard that the flat Earth as a belief existed. I was telling people I've met a flat earther, and they just did not believe that that could possibly be a thing. And I stayed around the flat Earth movement. And then by the time 2017, 2018 came along, it was an international phenomenon. There were TV shows, there were huge YouTube channels, and I'd watched this kind of build. And I went along the UK Flat Earth Convention, and almost every single speaker during the course of their talk would just drop in casually and I was going through a really hard time in my life, and then I found the flat earth, or I had a midlife crisis, I had a health crisis, I lost a loved one, a relationship ended. And these were the catalyzing moments for them finding their way off the beaten path. And I think we have to bear that in mind as well when we're looking at, in terms of the journeys people are on. Everybody is a hero in their own journey in these kind of senses. People will always have very good reasons for the actions that they took along the way. Even if those actions were irrational, we rationalize. We look back and say, well, the you pick your way through the overgrowth, and then you turn back and there's a path through the bushes, and that path looks like that's the way you always would have come, but you forged that path as you went. It looks like you discover the path as you walk. People will rationalize that this is the journey that I was on, but actually for a lot of people, something happened in their life, a crisis point emerged, and that crisis point can send people, because there's this scary existential moment, off grasping irrational solutions, superstitious solutions that aren't backed by evidence, that don't make sense to a rational mind. And they can actually get out of that crisis and regain their rational mind, but then not want to look back and say, and that was me being irrational. So this new path that I'm on is completely wrong. So yeah, so much of the where people end up, it feels like an inevitable conclusion of their journey, but that track, they can jump the tracks at various points and not be able to turn back.
Yeah, and I like that you brought up about the whole flat earther thing because I guess I might have heard about flat earthers when I, I'm an average podcast listener, and I think somewhere along the line, since like I think I started listening to podcasts like back in 2008, somewhere along the line I ended up hearing about flat earthers, and I'm like, oh my word, these people are out there and they're real, but it's
Mm,
like I never knew any of them. And then I just found out not even a week ago that this new and dear friend of my mother's is a flat earther. And
really?
yeah,
Okay.
and how the conversations that she has had with him, she doesn't agree with any of those things, and she's like, okay, well, you do you. I'm gonna do me, but this is not something that I'm going to follow through. And I was talking with my partner Libby about it. As I'm explaining some of the things about how like flat Earth belief and the kind of the tenets that they believe in about
Mm,
how the Earth functions if it is a flat Earth and everything. She just because she's a much more scientific person than I am. She has a degree in neuroscience,
okay.
and she kind of like squints and maybe even like turns her head, and she's like, these people actually believe that, and now I can say yes, and these people are among us because now there is someone who is much more within my sphere of influence that I never even knew in
Mm,
that regard. And it is incredible because I have heard some of his story, and like he was just recently released from prison, is like on probation and everything, had a very tumultuous and scary experience take place in his life that got him into legal trouble. And it it makes me really curious right now to wonder if his belief in the earth being flat, was that something that he believed in before this experience, or was it something that came up when there was so much uncertainty and fear, and he wasn't entirely certain what was up,
mm.
what was down in that moment?
Yeah, I mean, for so many people, that was the thing. So the biggest factors that got people into flat Earth movement, crisis point in their life, absolutely one of them. The technological, the algorithmic nature of YouTube, essentially. YouTube turned people into flat earthers. People in that crisis point are looking for answers. YouTube went through a period of time where it would say, "Hey, here's an answer," and YouTube was doing that without realizing they were promoting flat Earth. They were just trying to keep promoting videos that were high engagement. But the problem is the flat Earth videos were quite high engagement because you had some people who watched them because they thought they were true, other people watched them because they thought they were funny, other people watched them because they wanted to do a point by point takedown of everything that was being said, and YouTube just saw one large audience and said, "Well, this video is high engagement. Let's keep sending this to people." Facebook were doing the same thing. It was high engagement pages that they were saying to people in yoga groups, "Hey, maybe you want to join this flat Earth group. This Group X is high engagement. We don't care what the content is. We're just trying to keep people on the platform to keep serving them ads." That was one of the other things that radicalized people into the flat Earth. And we know the effect of that because when YouTube were collared about that and criticized, and when Facebook were criticized, they tweaked their algorithm. Facebook tweaked their algorithm to stop promoting pages and to start promoting groups to try and encourage communities, but they didn't change their incentive structure, and so Facebook stopped turning people into flat earthers and started to turn them into QAnon proponents. And it was really interesting to me watching the through line from flat earther to QAnon proponent to COVID lockdown deniers to anti-vaxxers. One of the biggest anti-vax publications and groups and protests in the UK was ran by a guy called Darren Nesbitt, who I knew from the Flat Earth Conference because he was one of the UK's leading flat earthers in 2018. And by 2024, 2023, he's one of the UK's leading lockdown and COVID kind of deniers. So it is a line through it. And then the other factor that gets people into the flat earth is religiosity. And that was something that I found really fascinating when I really spent some time looking into the flat earth, like the history and the arguments that were being used. Like the YouTube video that persuaded most people to become flat earthers, the most influential video was something called 200 Proofs the Earth is Not a Spinning Ball by a guy called Eric Dubay. And when you watch that video, it's got little images of flat earth arguments. Those flat earth arguments are taken from a pamphlet from 1838 by Samuel Rowbotham, who was one of the original flat earthers of the modern flat earth movement. And they're literally just screen grabs or, copy paste kind of scans of that original argument. And he was making those arguments to persuade people that Darwin was wrong, evolution's not true because the Bible's real. And if he could prove the Bible's real, he can disprove evolution. And so he was using the flat Earth as a tool to get people into religion and to reject science. Then, and it's interesting to me that best part of 2 centuries later, the exact same diagrams from the same book are now being used. And in my entire time of talking to flat earthers, I've met two flat earthers out of literally dozens who aren't religious, and those two were from the Czech Republic. And I wonder whether that's because under the Iron Curtain, in the in kind of communism and things, religion was banned, so they grew up not in an English speaking world, not in a very religious world. And so maybe they were inoculated against the religious elements of flat earth, but not the anti-science elements. But yeah, the religiosity of the flat earth is the third kind of pillar that I think is really interesting. And I'd find it really interesting to know whether the person in your mum's life came at this from a religious perspective, or if not, if they're now at a religious perspective via the mechanism of flat earth.
Yeah, and I don't know the answer to that because I've yet to meet this friend, but like my mom really wants me to meet him at some
Hmm.
point. Apparently he's like just a couple years younger than I am.
Okay.
However, I do know that he is like much more conservative than she is, and I didn't think that was possible with my mom. I really did not think anyone could
Hmm.
get more conservative than her. But he has also been asking her because she's not currently attending a church right now, but she is uh I guess you could even describe her as like a Jesus freak. It,
Hmm.
it's it's like a matter of minutes as to when she first brings up Jesus in any kind of conversation. As you roll your eyes, I know the people didn't see that, but
No,
um,
that was an understanding
yeah.
nod rather than a roll the
Yeah.
eyes, to be clear.
However, he has been asking her if she will like start to go to church with him sometimes. He doesn't have a church, but he
Hmm.
wants to find one because he really misses that community. So it really is. While I don't know the answer, I imagine that just that whole religiosity aspect of it is probably so closely entwined with
Hmm.
the whole flat earth belief that what you're saying here is that it's, usually it's the there is this really entrenched religious belief that then leads into that, or this thing comes in and it has a religious dynamic tied to it. I would be surprised if it was outside of those two.
Yeah, yeah. That aspect of community is another really, really fascinating part of it, I think. And it's something that religions do well, and it's one of the things I think that keeps religions so prominent in society is because they can point to community, and it's quite easy to form a community when you have a building dedicated to your thing in every town and city in large parts of the world that a random person who happens to agree with that idea can walk into and find a ready-made community. And that happens, for lots of different religions. It doesn't really happen for a lot of different things. It doesn't happen as much for atheism. There isn't a building dedicated to not religion, but you can get it around other other things that provide community, things like sports and various things like that. So I think that community aspect is huge, and I think it's what keeps people in conspiracy theory circles, even when they come across ideas that they would otherwise disagree with. So the flat earth, for example, the more time you spend in the flat earth movement and similar with the anti-vax movement, in the deep conspiracy parts of it, the more you're going to come across increasingly anti-Semitic arguments in there and increasingly anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that overlap in. And part of that is, if the world is flat, someone is hiding that truth from us. We have to find who that someone is. Here's 2 centuries or 3 centuries worth of material pointing to the Jews from conspiracy theory and other kind of racist ideas, and so people will kind of piggyback on those. But I think for the people who end up in those spaces, they might be put off by those arguments. But once you've left the mainstream community and you found this new community, if you're put off by something in this new community, where do you go? It's much harder to leave a second community and hope you'll find a third. And so people are way more likely to start to accept things that they would have found otherwise off-putting because they don't want to leave this new group they found. And okay, John, he says some stuff about the Jews from time to time, but sure, he sure is right about the flat earth. So we should hear him out, and before you know it, you're less offended when he goes off on those anti-Semitic rants, or whichever particular other idea that you would have been against, you're more willing to give that space because he agrees with you on this thing that everyone else disagrees with you on. So it's a kind of, I'm willing to overlook the bad sides of it. But yeah, the community aspect of it is such a huge part of it for people.
Yeah, and considering that it was December 2019 when I stepped away from the Christian church.
Oh
And
wow.
yeah, and Libby had even stepped away before then. There were several months where she was like not she's like, I no, I'm just not going to go to church today. And it's like, okay, well, I'll go by myself. And of
Mm,
course, I would have people asking me, it's like, so, yeah, where's Libby? We haven't seen her in a while. But as soon as it's like the veil started to be lifted from my eyes and we started connecting on this, it's like, yeah, we officially stepped away from the church in December of 2019. And then we did have, like, I used to lead a small group where the whole focus was helping people overcome unwanted porn use and unwanted sexual behavior and that kind of stuff, really big in the church.
mm,
And I was a leader for that. I was almost like a head of the men's recovery ministry for a while, and I had some very dear friends. And then as soon as you step away from the church, you're almost forgotten about because you're
yeah.
you're not showing up at the place where the community is happening as much as the church was like, no, you need to be doing more outside with each other. It was almost like pulling teeth to try and get people to actually get together and do something outside of the traditional, like, one day a week small group meeting and then the big meeting at church
Mm,
kind of thing. And so I definitely experienced that where I lost that community. And there are some people I will still think about them and I'm like, I kind of wonder how they're doing.
yeah.
But at
Yeah.
the
And
at the same time, it's like, I they pretty much just left me when I left the church.
Mm.
Or I guess I left them is probably more apt to how they would portray that.
Yeah.
And thankfully, I do have a really strong community with some friends. Three of them are Christian, and then I have two of them who are, I guess technically four of them are Christian, and two of them are homosexual, which I never had homosexual friends growing up because, you can't be around those people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet these are some of the most loving people that I've been around, and we get together like quite frequently to play like Dungeons and Dragons and share in this kind of fun community that these are the first people I've ever had Friendsgiving with. And now that's turned into a yearly tradition. And I don't know where I would be without that community because it really is important. It really is
Yeah.
important to have that community of people. And you are so right. Religion kind of has a chokehold on that, on finding that established community where all you have to do is proclaim that you believe these things and you go to this building and yay, you're a part of the community. You're a part of the family now.
Yeah,
But
and
then
it's interesting as well because, in that situation, religion has someone whose job it is, who's paid essentially to make that community happen. But so it has a chokehold on the ease of accessing community. But as you illustrated there, it also has a chokehold on what counts as community. Is that you have to it selects your community for you. Whereas once you are at liberty to select your own community, you will find there are so many more interesting people you could be hanging out with that religion is keeping you from. So once we do have it's harder because you no longer have somebody curating and creating a community for you. You have to put the work in to establish those relationships and maintain those relationships, and it takes time and it takes energy to keep remembering to say to someone, "Hey, we've not caught up for a while. Let's hang out. Let's do something. Let's go for coffee." But it's so much more rewarding because these are the people you've chosen rather than had an off the shelf community kind of deliver. You've walked into a building and I'll have one community, please. It's no longer kind of a bespoke to you experience. So yeah, the chokehold that religion has on community is interesting from both those perspectives, in that it gives you a community, but also prevents you building your own community.
yeah. And oh God, Marsh, I love this conversation that we're having, and we haven't even gotten into any of my questions yet. This is just I feel like we could spend like our entire time here just going back and forth on, the different dynamics of the conspiracies that have been brought up and
Mm.
community and religion and everything. However, all of that being said, we want to know more about you because the premise of these episodes is I either research or I interview someone who I see having heroic qualities based on the hero's journey and everything. And there's always something that we can learn from these people. And so I would really love for my audience to learn more from you and your journey here, Marsh.
Okay.
So the first question I'm going to ask is, would you give us a brief snapshot of important moments in your life?
Oh wow, that is a huge kind of thing. I'd say in terms of the journey I've been on as in my adult life, the moment that it kind of really all started would have been 2009, February 2009, I think it would have been. On March, something like that kind of time. So basically, I discovered skepticism. I found that there were people out there who also agreed that psychics almost certainly weren't talking to the dead, and that you and I should care about that. That we shouldn't just say, "Well, I'm not going to go and see a psychic. I'm not going to be fooled by it, so it doesn't matter." I was always of the opinion, no, it does matter because other people are being fooled in this kind of way. They're being exploited in this kind of way, and if someone's being exploited, how can we not want to stop that? How can we not want to help? If you saw someone being mugged on the street, you wouldn't walk past, but we would allow people to be kind of culturally mugged by these people who are taking money off them, and then we wouldn't really care. So I was always someone who cared about that. And I found myself just Googling to see whether there were any skeptical groups in Liverpool. And I came across someone on Meetup who was asking exactly the same question. And I messaged him overnight, a guy I'd never met before, to say, there isn't, but it seems like we should start one. And the next morning, the Merseyside Skeptic Society had started, and that
Oh,
person was Mike
wow.
Hall, who
Okay.
I'd never met before, was a complete stranger in my life. And we started our Skeptic Society then. We had a meeting in the pub. We had like 10 people come along. We had a second meeting in the pub a month later. We had 5 people come along. And we said, if this doesn't take off in a few months' time, maybe there's no appetite here. And that was 2009, and we've been having monthly get-togethers in the pub ever since. And Mike went on to become my one of my best friends. He was the best man at my wedding, but also we established a community from that. And so
Yeah.
every month, twice a month, in fact, we're in a pub, and people who are interested in critical thinking from anywhere in the area will come along and know that there is a room there where people care about this kind of stuff. People aren't going to get offended if you say, I don't believe in God. I don't think people are talking the dead. Astrology doesn't really have any persuasive power over our lives, those types of things. So, yeah, that's kind of the first big moment of my I'm not going to say heroic journey, my journey into the critical thinker that I became. And literally, that was February 2009. By January 2010, so not even a full year later, we had decided that we wanted to be an activist organization. So we weren't just about putting events on, we were trying to sort of push back. We'd recognized that homeopathic remedies that are ineffective, they're nothing but sugar and water. These were routinely sold in pharmacies across the country, including by very well respected pharmacies. We decided to do something about that. The thing we decided to do was get people to essentially flash mob, but go into their local Boots pharmacy, buy some homeopathic remedies, then stand outside of that pharmacy, and at exactly the same minute of the day, all around the country, people would take an entire overdose of that homeopathic remedy. So you've just bought a pack of homeopathic pills. We'll stand outside of the Boots pharmacy and take an overdose all together. And we had like 300 people in 13 different cities around the UK at 23 minutes past 10 in the morning. That's less than a year of me being involved in skepticism. That was front page news of the BBC news site all day. It was in every single national newspaper. And it, in part, changed the conversation around what homeopathic remedies were in the UK. And it led into all this kind of other activism that I've done since then. So I think those are two really big pivotal moments: discovering skepticism and deciding, actually, this isn't something that we have to look at from a distance. This is something we get to like roll your sleeves up and get your hands dirty and get involved in. And when you do that, you end up in interesting, weird spaces, and you have stories to tell and adventures along the way. So yeah, I've always since then I've had this mentality of the stuff that's out there. It's we don't have to just complain about it. We can see what we can do about it. Yeah, and that actually 5 years later, 2014, that became my full-time job for a charity called the Good Thinking Society. It's now my job to see what's out there, see what we can do about it, and then do it. So yeah, that's kind of those are some of the biggest pivotal points, I'd say, in the early skeptical journey that I was on.
That's incredible because I was not aware of those stories. And uh one thing that you said that I want to touch base on, and it's a pretty innocuous comment that you
Mm,
made about how you said that I'm not going to call myself a hero, but on my journey, and that really stood out to me because in a lot of the really compelling stories that we like to hear or like to listen to and read, whether we are talking about works of fiction or like biographies and that kind of stuff, heroes rarely admit that they are heroes. I'm not trying to, like, you dodged a bus by saying, I'm not going to call myself a hero, and I'm pushing you back out in front of me being like, just take it, accept it.
yeah, yeah.
Um that really did stand out to me because we can take a look at these things that you've done with the homeopathy and the communities that you have created, the activism that you're doing. Now, some people would look at that and be like, "Oh, pff, big deal. What's so grand about that?" And yet there are those people out there where they would look at that and be like, "Man, someone like him is going out there and he's doing something, and
Mm,
he's making these impacts." and to the point that you had people overdosing on these homeopathic prescriptions, and that was big news, and it changed the conversation that people were
Yeah.
having around it. That
And
is
we
that's
did the same thing the
incredible.
next year. Yeah, like a year later, I headed up the campaign internationally. We had 1,700 people taking part in 70 different cities in 39 different countries. We had a research scientist in Australia doing this overdose. And to be clear, an overdose on homeopathic remedies is not going to do anything to you because they are just sugar pills. So we
Yeah.
say overdose. We're always very careful to say
Hmm.
that we're, putting quote marks around it because it's not a real overdose. It's
Yeah.
an illustration of the fact that these aren't real medicines. And we know that the knock on effects of that was significant because in other countries they took that moment of collective action and ran with it and were able to kind of influence things locally. And I think partly the reason that I don't like accepting a label like hero or anything like that. It feels odd to me to do that. Is I think if somebody goes out and seeks being the hero in that situation, they don't go on and do these things because they feel um, content once they get some personal acclaim or personal kind of attention. But I think for me, the work is always the important, interesting thing. Like, what is the next thing that I can be doing? So even in that homeopathy conversation, we realised, and we've always known in the UK, that the National Health Service spends some money on homeopathy. And skeptics have always sat around and said, this is annoying, this is terrible, this shouldn't happen. But it's always just been a conversation that we had. So when I started working for this charity, it became my job to say, well, how do I do something about this? And I used freedom of information law to figure out exactly where money was being spent around the UK. I then started to look at the contracts that were being signed and when they were being signed. I pushed for public consultations. I encouraged doctors and scientists and skeptics to write into those consultations. And the UK's National Health Service no longer spends money on homeopathy because of the work that I did as this charity. Um, and that's saving like £6 million a year, 5.8 I think it was, or 5.2, something in that kind of region, £1 million a year. But it's no longer adding credibility to a medicine to a treatment that can't possibly work. And so I can look back and say the reason the NHS no longer funds homeopathy is because I decided I was going to do something about this. I figured where the pressure points, where the action points were, and I did something. But I don't look back and say, and that makes me a hero or anything like that. The work itself is interesting, and so when I talk about it, I don't talk about, and then I did this, and aren't I great for doing that? I talk about the reasons why and how I managed to unpick the knot as much as anything else, how knotty it was, and exactly how you untie this knot, and in the process. Because the other thing I want to get across is there isn't a barrier to this, really. I mean, I'm fortunate that I do this for a living, that my time is funded by the charity to just spend the time on this. But there is no permission needed to get involved in protesting against a psychic or investigating a conspiracy theorist group and understanding these things. There's no barrier to entry. It's just the will to want to be doing it. And I started in 2009 deciding I'm interested. I'm going to see where this takes me. I started pulling threads and just wanted to chase where those threads would leave me. And it leads me into this position where I now do this full time and I've got these kind of interesting stories and successes and adventures along the way. And I'm trying to, my biggest passion is trying to encourage other people to find where those threads are around them and what can be gained by tugging at them.
Yeah, and I just had this comparison come to mind here. You're again, I like that analogy. You're trying to step out of the way of this bus, and I'm like, trying to push you into it and everything. What you're describing here is this dynamic of what can be a part of like heroes, in that they can have a lot of bluster,
Mm.
and they can have that grandiose view of themselves. And for some reason, I envision Gaston from the Beauty and the Beast as
Yes, yeah,
as
yeah, yeah.
someone who's, and he legitimately thought he was the hero, but then you take a look at what was actually going on, and he was the antagonist instead.
Mm.
He wasn't the protagonist in the story. He was the antagonist in his story. And I have even done this comparison that antagonists believe that they are the hero in their story
Yeah,
as
yeah.
well. And so it's like, I want to applaud you on that because if you were one of those people that would just like constantly tout just like how good you are and all this great work that you've been doing and everything, and oh look at me, this is
Mm,
all the stuff that I've been doing, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation. But because I've heard your work, because I have listened to individuals like Cecil Cicerello and Eli Bosnick, No Illusions, Heath Enright, all of these other people that have talked about you, and it is coming from the words are coming from people who know you,
mm.
then to me that's like, okay, this is someone I really want to have that conversation with, because there is a certain dynamic of humility that really ties in a lot of different heroes throughout literature. Again,
Yeah,
the heroes would not call themselves heroes.
yeah, I think humility is really important because without it, you can be overinflated. I think the moment that you start believing your own bullshit is when you start resting on your laurels. And I think it's really important to, you can have satisfaction in the things that you've achieved and satisfaction in jobs well done. And, there's nothing I love more than being able to look back at the various odd things I've done in my life and be able to tell stories about them. I love to sit and sort of, I do entire talks where some of them are like, okay, and this is where I ended up, and you'll never guess what happened. And one of the reasons I do those talks isn't so people think, wow, he's amazing, he's the greatest person ever. It's so they think all that happened because he kept following the thread. And he wasn't somebody, I didn't have a PhD in this kind of background. I didn't have a silver spoon entry from, it's not like my parents were famous in this area and gave me a leg up. It's just kind of, I found some stuff I found interesting and I followed it, and I tried to follow it as honestly as possible, as non-judgmentally as possible, and tried to ask honest questions. And I think if people do that without humility, they can see themselves, as the Gastons. I'm so great. Look at all this stuff that I've done. And I think it's so much more interesting to let the stories tell themselves, and for you to be, you're on the road, on the path with the story, but you're provoking the events, but they're not, the events aren't in service to you, the story isn't in service to you, the story's in service to what you're trying to achieve, or what you managed to achieve, or the way that you were able to stop this thing that was exploiting people. I think those are the important things. Yeah, so I think it's really important to have humility in this stuff, so that you carry on pushing, carry on trying to find something you can do.
Yeah, and I'm reminded with the political landscape that we're finding ourselves in right now, that the people who do tend to be antagonistic are the ones who believe that they've done no wrong.
Mm,
And all we have to do is take a look at the US's current president, who can do no wrong, coming from his own mouth.
yeah, yeah,
And it's just like, really? That's not a person who inspires. Though I mean there are the MAGA individuals that I'm like, I don't know how he's inspiring you guys. But I'm looking at it through a skeptical lens in that
mm,
regard, and being like, someone who uses those kind of grandiose claims and everything, that no, it does not set well with me. And
yeah.
I I always am reminded that, and this is what I love about doing these interviews and like researching some of these figures, is we have all done things that we have regretted, and we have learned from those,
Mm,
because that is a part of just not the hero's journey, just the human experience in general. Is
yeah.
we have I have not been shy about admitting that I have said and done some horrible things to people when I was younger. And I
Mm,
wish I could go back and apologize to these people for the things that I had done. And if I ever have the opportunity, I will apologize and say, man, I was so young and stupid. I didn't know what I was talking about. And I'm so sorry for that. And you have the Gastons out there who, if they do apologize for anything, it's not to mend something that has been harmed. It is to manipulate in order to
Yeah.
get what they want.
Or to bolster their own self-image,
Yeah,
their own self-stories. That, well, I did those things, but I apologize for it. But yeah, I think you have to be able to admit that you are fallible. You have to be able to admit that you're going to get things wrong, and you've got to be able to own up to when that's happened. Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
awesome. Oh man, this is such a great conversation, Marsh. I love it. So my next question is, speaking of having to overcome things or making mistakes and trying to make these amends, is what is something in your life that you have had to overcome?
Oh gosh, that's a hard question. I'm not sure how best to answer that. I mean, I there are things that I there are things I do in terms of the things that I come across, the projects that I come across, where I will see an issue and try to solve that. I'm not sure if that's like a personal failing to redress or a personal thing to apologize for, but there are things like I very early on in my skeptical work, I came across a clinic based here in Liverpool that was claiming it could cure cancer, or claiming it could diagnose cancer with a series of alternative scans that don't work. And we made complaints about that clinic to regulators, and those complaints were held up and things, but nothing really changed. And we made a series of complaints over the course of 5 years, I think, and nothing was really changing. But we felt like we were achieving something. And then a few years later, I got contacted by someone whose mum had been attending that clinic when she had a very diagnosable, very treatable form of cancer, and her mum died as a result of the advice that she was given. And it was very hard for me. I took that very personally as a personal failing that I'd known about this clinic for a long time, and I'd done some stuff, but I hadn't done enough. And could I have done more? And then to meet people, and I've met several other people since then who've died as a result of the advice that they were given at this clinic. I took that I wore that very heavily because I felt like I knew that this thing was happening. I could I have done more to do it? I almost certainly could have done more because I felt like, well, we've written a few complaints. We got a complaint published in a newspaper, mission accomplished. But the mission was to try and stop people being harmed, and they weren't stopped being harmed. And so, I mean, I've continued to try and work. That clinic is actually still going, and I've worked with the BBC. There's been a big documentary about them. There's been another film about them, and they seem unsinkable. I'm working with the regulators about it right now. I still haven't made amends for that, and I feel like I have to make amends for the people who I've met who've been lost as a result of that. So yeah, I don't know if that's quite what you were asking for. It's a thing that kind of comes to mind in terms of something I see as a failing that I want to try and put right.
Yeah, and I I'm naturally empathetic, and that was something that I did not realize growing up. It was honestly one of the things that got me bullied and mocked a lot, is because I wasn't the stereotypical masculine individual.
Mm,
And I did not realize that for me that was empathy. And it wasn't until like maybe 5 years ago that I finally was able to put words to what that was. And as you're describing these situations, I was feeling a lot of sadness,
mm,
a lot of despair, because again, going back to our previous conversation, these people, if we assume that they are wanting to help and serve people, then we have to believe that they believe they're doing something good.
yeah.
And yet we have evidence that shows that it's actually harming some of these people. And the the could and should messaging really stood out to me about, could you have done more? Should you have done more in order to prevent this loss of valuable life and everything? And I mean, the question is something in your life that you have overcome. Sounds like you're still working to overcome.
Yeah.
this struggle.
Yeah, I think so, and I mean, I wear it heavily too in that
Hmm.
sort of empathy sense, and I've it's not the only time I've been in that kind of situation. I've spoken to, I interviewed on Be Reasonable a guy called Jim Humble, who's the inventor of Miracle Mineral Supplement, which is a form of industrial bleach that he believes will cure malaria, cancer, AIDS, autism, Crohn's disease, kind of everything. And he was a big scandal in the newspapers about 12 years ago, something like that, and refused to talk to any of the newspapers. But I got an interview with him for Be Reasonable. And I assume it's because he thought it was such a small show that I wouldn't offer any kind of pushback. But I had this really weird conversation with him where I assumed he would be this snake oil salesman who I assumed wouldn't have the best of intentions, would have ill intent, would be just trying to sort of make money. And when I got him on the phone, I realized he sounded like an incredibly frail old man, and he sounded like he was unwell. He was probably treating himself with the stuff that he was selling. And I think he was sincere that he believed he was helping, but what he was giving people was incredibly dangerous, and he was giving it to
Yeah.
people who were at their worst in terms of their health too. So like people with terminal diseases, he was saying this was the cure for. And it occurred to me in the course of the conversation when he's talking about 50,000 people with cancer and 60,000 people with malaria, that he's talking about hundreds of thousands of people he says he's given this to, and he's probably exaggerating. But even if he's exaggerating by a factor of 100, that's still thousands of people with deadly diseases that he's given something to that can only harm them, which means there's hundreds, probably, if not thousands of people who are dead because of the guy I'm talking to on the phone right now. And that's a very heavy thing to hit you in the middle of a conversation. That's one of the
Yeah.
things that really taught me that even the best of intentions, unchecked by skepticism, can lead to enormously dangerous places. And that's why it is important that we're there. But yeah, that empathy in the conversation you're having is such a hard thing to wear, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my next question for you, Marsh, is who is someone who has helped you get where you are today?
Okay, so there's a few things I would say to that. One, the support my wife has offered me over the 17 years, 16 years we've been together is exactly key to all of that. She actually, I started dating her in 2009. And that was months after I'd started the Skeptic Society. So like my relationship with her and the relationship with the skepticism go hand in hand. Even if she's not, she wouldn't define herself as a skeptic, or she absolutely is. She just hates labels and things. So certainly my wife. The relationship with Mike Hall, who I founded the Merseyside Skeptics with, has been a huge part of my life, like a pivotal, defining part of my life, because the two of us have developed together this approach that is activist and outward looking in its skepticism. It's not enough for us to just have the right answer. We have to do something about that. We have to do something with that to try and make the world a better place. So Mike absolutely is somebody who's helped me get to where I am. And then I'd also have to say, I work for a charity called the Good Thinking Society that I've worked there since 2014. That charity was founded by a science writer called Simon Singh, who wanted to give back to the skeptical community because the skeptical community had his back when he was being sued for criticizing the chiropractic industry. And his criticisms were fair. The lawsuit was unfair, but it took a huge amount of his time and patience and energy and his finances. And he was only able to stand up to that because of the community that rallied behind him. He started the charity as a result of that and funds the charity himself. And I took on the role as full-time employee at that charity in 2014, and that has been my main job ever since then. So Simon has been a huge part of the giving me the space and the freedom and the support and the encouragement and everything it takes to chase down these weird leads and follow the rabbit holes in interesting places. So yeah, I'd say those three is what I'd say to that.
Awesome. And I love hearing the answers to these questions because when we're talking about people who have these allies and these mentors who help them get where they are today, it's constantly a reminder that we don't get where we are alone.
Yeah.
Is that we always have those people supporting us. We have those people that really do leave those lasting impacts in our lives, whether it's someone as significant and close to us as like a spouse or a partner, or if we're talking about someone who has put us into a position through like an organization with work with
Mm.
opportunities that we wouldn't have had otherwise. And it's it really is telling of us as individuals who these people are that have had these significant impacts in our lives.
Yeah,
And,
yeah,
you had even shared that, Mike Hall was he was your best man at your wedding. And
yeah,
that's, that is like an honored position when we're when we're talking with that kind of a ceremony and someone that you met just through meetup and you guys were asking some of the same questions and that it's like this very initial interaction turned into something that is so entwined that it's like your life wouldn't be the same without them.
yeah, yeah, very much. And he and I have influenced each other and kind of grown together in the last so many years since 2009, 16 years since 2009. Yeah. And to be honest, lots of the people that I've met through the Skeptic Society as well, through the Merseyside Skeptic Society, have had massive impact on my life and vice versa. I think that's that important thing of when you build a community and you have that community and it's a community that you can help to choose and create and support. It's a two-way street, and I think that's something, going back to the religion aspect, I don't think that's something that religion can offer, like a two-way street. You will have your religious community so that you're part of, but you won't really influence the top of that. You're not going to change the church that you're part of or the denomination that you're part of. Whereas we really can change not just our skeptical organization, but what we've built in Liverpool in the Merseyside Skeptic Society, this idea of compassionate skepticism, of empathetic skepticism. How do we go from just having the right answer to what can we do to help people and help people understand and having those kind of open conversations? That has influenced how the UK skeptical scene works. And there are organizations around the country, around the world, who take a lead from that style of empathetic skepticism that we've established, that grew out of our community in Liverpool. So yeah, I think you put into that community, but you can also influence the direction of those communities, and I think that's so important too.
Yeah, you actually just said something that really touched something within me because you are now the second person that I have heard the phrase empathetic skepticism
Okay.
from. My friend Mike McCarg that I was telling you about, he was the first one to introduce me to empathetic skepticism, and I
Mm,
even remember bringing that up to my friend group, and one of my dear friends, he just kind of looked at me. He's like, empathetic skepticism? Aren't those like opposing forces? It's like aren't they opposite from each other? And considering this, what we're talking about is having these like really good conversations with people. He posed that question and really got me to think about the concept of empathetic skepticism and
mm.
actually put words to how it is. It's like, yeah, I am skeptical about what people are saying, about the claims these people are making, and yet I am also attuning to their motives and their emotions and how important it is to have both of those
Yeah.
for us to kind of get the whole picture of what's going on.
Yeah, I think that's it. And also, if we're going to try to help people question what it is that they believe and whether that's accurate or not, we have to do that by first understanding people. It's not enough
Yeah.
to be judgmental from a distance. There will be people who, when I first got involved in skepticism, would say things like, "Well, if people believe in alternative medicine, that's just Darwinism. That's the that's the cost of stupidity, the cost of gullibility." And I think that is so lacking in empathy. And it's so
Yeah.
lacking in the fact that, in an understanding of the fact that we are all flawed. My cognition is going to be flawed. I'm going to make mistakes in what I believe. I'm more likely to make those mistakes when I'm in the greatest duress in my life. And when I'm having the worst day of my life because of a health crisis or I might have lost someone, if someone comes along with a simple answer, I'm going to be more likely to accept that. And I think for me that compassionate skepticism, empathetic skepticism, is driven in part by being an atheist, because I know my belief is that I don't think there is an afterlife. There's no evidence that we should be acting like there's a life to follow this one. So if this is our one shot, we've got to make the most of this one shot. But we've also got to help other people make the most of their one shot, because how can I stand by and watch someone be exploited and their one shot at life be ruined or impinged upon by someone else when I could do something about it? So I think it all flows from, there's this social contract that we're all part of, is you watch my back, I'll watch your back because I need someone watching my back when I need that too.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that. The whole what you watch your back wall or I watch your back while you watch mine.
Yeah,
Oh, that is so good, and how that in a lot of cases that really is an unspoken social contract. And I'm thinking about the I'm thinking about the whole tribalism dynamics that we're experiencing in our modern society and religion and everything, because there is a lot of watching each other's backs.
yeah,
And but the whole thing about that is you also need to have someone or something that you're watching these others' backs for.
yeah,
As
yeah.
oh man, it wh- I'm sorry, my brain is just like really uh just a real quick aside here. It was like 2 Saturdays ago, I got together with my friends and we were playing a social deduction game. And I
Mm,
was verbally processing why I was accusing someone of like being the villain and everything. And I just created such a word salad as I was trying to so I was trying to describe my thoughts, but then as soon as I started verbalizing it, it's like things were not adding up. And then suddenly I realized my accusation was probably incorrect, and I was trying to backpedal on it and everything. That one of my friends called me Trump in that
right.
instance. I never did. Actually, I did thank him for that, because as soon as he said that, I'm like, oh my God, I really did sound like Trump there. I wholeheartedly agree. Um, but uh, the going back to what we've been talking about here, how religion can absolutely have that chokehold on community, and religion also tells us what's good, what's bad, what's the inside, what's the other,
Mm,
and what it is that we need to fear. And when individuals like you and I who don't fit within that religious dynamic that's prominent in so many cultures, and we're the ones who are othered, then it really necessitates having those people in our lives who will watch our backs. And my friends, I call them, we actually within the group we call ourselves our chosen family. These
yeah,
are the people we have chosen to be in our lives. These are the people that we trust. And I don't the whole premise of this question, who's someone who helped you get where you are today, we we tend to flounder and flail and even just kind of disappear if we do not have those people who are watching our backs, if we don't
yeah,
have those people who are supporting us. And you take a look at any heroic story, fictional or non-fictional, and they always have those allies. They always have that mentor. One of the ones I always am drawn to first when I'm having this conversation is the whole relationship between Obi-Wan Kenobi and Luke Skywalker. How, you know, Obi-Wan was an ally, but he also was a mentor who pulled Luke
mm,
into the position that he eventually came into. He's the one who started that. And if we don't have those people that watch out for us, that believe the best in us and are willing to support us even when we are having our worst moments in life, because we all do, we wouldn't get anywhere, and
Yeah.
we would not be able to really survive in this crazy ride that we call life.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's also why I think it's really important for us to recognize the spaces in which we can be that for other people, where they want to have that. And I'm in my 40s now. I'm more in a position where I have friends in my life, people who've come into the Skeptical Society, who I will act as a mentor for, to try and help them see what their potentials are and things like that. So I think we have to keep giving back, and we have to keep finding spaces where we can be supportive to people. And yeah,
Absolutely.
that's kind of how it all works. It has to.
Yeah, and I'm also in my 40s as well, so I wholeheartedly agree with you on that. And it actually reminds me of something that I heard when I was in the Christian tradition, is the finding your Pauls, finding your Barnabases, and finding your Timothys.
Okay.
Are you familiar with these characters in the New Testament?
Only passing. It's a long time since I
Yeah.
was particularly involved in religion.
Yeah. So the way that they describe these is a Paul is a person who is further ahead, who is helping to guide you, because that's kind of what Paul did a lot with
Hmm.
many people. But then also in the story, Paul and Barnabas were in the same position, and they worked together and they supported each other. So finding those people that are in the same place that you are, but then at the same time, you're also looking back to the people coming behind you, and those are your
Hmm.
Timothys,
Right. Okay.
because Paul had a very pastoral relationship with Timothy, and so what you're describing here about the for those of us who are in midlife and everything, it's not just a matter of us always looking forward to try and find the people who are going to help get us forward, but we do need to start looking back to the generations that are coming up in order to offer them a helping hand, to help
Yeah.
them step into their own strengths, their own abilities, but at the same time having those close allies that are with us in the battles that we face on a daily basis.
Yeah, and I think that's it. And I think it's also where the people who would grasp the hero mantle, the hero title very readily, they're less likely to look for the opportunities where they can help someone else become the best that they can be and find out.
Yeah.
But I think if your motivation is to leave the world in a better position than you found it, that doesn't have to be through your own actions and machinations. That can be through who you support in doing things for their best. And there can be people around you who are better suited to something, to an opportunity that you turn down and pass to them because they're the better person for that. And I think having that humility to know your own role, your own limitations, your own expectations, and that you don't have to be the person who does everything and takes everything on. I think that's all part of that same humility, I think.
Yeah, and you said it, knowing our limitations is one of the things that really helps us to make the world a much better place
Mm,
than when we came into it. Because if we understand our own limitations, then we don't have that belief that we're the ones that have the answer to everything. We're the
yeah,
only ones who can come up with this. And again, that kind of goes on to the Gastons of the world, that the people who have all of the answers. Oh gosh, what is that? Oh shoot. I think I always get these mixed up. I think it's the Dunning-Kruger effect.
yes, yeah. That
Yeah,
you don't,
yeah.
you're not able to accurately judge your own abilities within a certain sphere.
Yeah, and so I'm always reminded of that. I learned about the Dunning-Kruger and the Baader-Meinhof effect roughly around the same time, and so I keep getting those crossed whenever it
Yeah.
comes up. But it is the people who jump in immediately to say, I'm the expert in this, I understand, I know. They tend to be the people we don't want to listen to, because those who truly know that they don't know a whole lot, those are the ones who have been in it the longest. They're the ones who understand how complicated, intricate, and really how it is impossible for us to know everything. But they're the ones that we want to listen to, and they're also the ones who are the most hesitant to actually speak up about it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And actually, a lot of the time, I have to be encouraged into where I do have a lot of expertise in something. I'm often having to be encouraged by the people around me to be the one who speaks up in that kind of area because I assume that the other people who are speaking up probably will know and have plenty of expertise. So yeah, and there are times that I'm not the one who should be who puts themselves forward in the times that they probably should. Yeah, I'm not the
Yeah.
best for that.
Well, I'm right there with you. I really struggle with that
Yeah.
too. I constantly fall back into it. Well, these other people know better than I do. There's always someone who knows better than I do. And like a very personal experience with this is in my friend group when we were playing Dungeons and Dragons, I was running us through a campaign and I am the game master. I'm the one who is the final arbiter of the rules.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was really hard for me to step into that position because there were three other people in the group that had more experience at running the games than I did. And it was very tempting for me to just kind of be like, "Hey John, what's the rule on this? Hey Ben, what's the rule on this? Katie, how would you rule on this?" But it's like in that moment, I'm the one who has to make the decision.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
They will honor and respect it. In fact, there's even this one point where my friend Ben, I told him to make a specific rule and he didn't agree with my logic on it, but he still did it anyways. And then he came in and we were able to talk just the two of us at one point, and he's like, "Yeah, you had done this and this was your logic for it, but this was my logic and how I interpret the rules." And we were able
Hmm.
to bridge that divide between us, and it also helped me to be a better game master in the end too.
Yeah, yeah.
So my next question for you, Marsh, and I love this question. What is something that you enjoy doing that you just come to life doing?
Oh, okay. Okay, several things. I absolutely adore being on stage telling people about the weird adventures and things that I've had. So I've got lots of talks that I've written based on the last 15 plus years of skeptical adventuring and things. And there's nothing more fun than being able to say, okay, here's the time I went to a flat earth conference and here are the observations that I made. Here's the thing that's funny, here's the thing that's kind of more upsetting or more thought provoking, and to talk you through not just the experience I had there, but what I think it means and what we can learn from it and how we kind of humanize people. I love to do that. And so actually one of the things I'm finding difficult at the moment, one of the most recent talks that I've written and I've been giving is a much drier talk about data fraud that I've found in maternity care. It's a very detailed thing, way too detailed to go into here, but it's very in depth and it's very data heavy, and you have to understand certain statistical principles for it. And giving a talk on that, people are fascinated by it, but they're not laughing because it's not funny, and they're not shocked because there aren't these kind of like emotional highs and lows. And so it's really weird to give a talk like that because all the other talks that I give, I can say, well, I know this part's going to make people respond in this kind of way, and then I can go to this part, which is going to change the emotion in the room. And being able to work an audience in that kind of way, and be able to talk people through things and watch people follow how I'm telling a story, I love to do that. I absolutely adore storytelling to a point where most of my friends have heard my stories so many times that they could probably repeat them themselves.
Oh, I've been there. I can't tell you the number of times I have worked with clients and I'm only 41 years old and I'm already starting to repeat myself. So I
Yeah,
apologize if you've already heard me say this before.
yeah, yeah, for certain.
Awesome. That's great. And I believe you're the first one that has mentioned that that's like, actually getting up in front of people and having these talks and everything. I know I was one of those people. If I had to get up in front of my classmates to give a presentation or a report, oh no, I don't want to do that. It's just like that was the most horrible thing you could ask me to do. And yet, like, as I have matured, and I'm putting myself out there just
Hmm.
with this podcast and everything, it has definitely become easier, and I do enjoy it. I have
Yeah.
yet to be like at some kind of speaking engagement. Oh my gosh. In fact, the last one I had done was pre-pandemic, where I'm an aspiring author, and so I gave a conversation, or I gave a presentation on like character descriptions to a group of young writers here locally, and that was a ton of fun for me to do. And that was also a relatively small group. I don't know, like I know QED was just this last October,
Mm.
and I don't know like how large the audience is for some of the talks and everything, but yeah, I can just imagine that I would probably definitely have those butterflies in my stomach if I was put
Do you know
in
what?
one of those
The secret
positions.
is the bigger the audience, the easier it is to address. The smaller audiences, any response that you're going to get, any reaction from the audience are going to be small because there's just fewer people there. Whereas in a large audience, every reaction is magnified. So, and that will
Okay.
have a feedback loop. So you get to a part in the story that's funny. If you're telling that to seven people who were there watching, they might feel insecure about laughing, or they might laugh, but not very much. Whereas if you're telling it to 700 people, even if 50, like, a small percentage is still going to be 20, 30, 40 people, and their laughter
Yeah.
is enough that will give people permission to react. So it's much
Oh.
easier to work a larger room than it is a very small room. Yeah.
That's good to know. That is good for me to know if I ever find myself in a position where I am going to be giving a talk to larger audiences. Wow, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
So my next question is, what is a hero to you?
Oh gosh. Okay. So I'm an odd person in that I don't really have heroes necessarily. So a lot of people say, well, so and so's a hero to me, and I look up to them, and I look up to people, but I'm always very wary to make anybody a hero because once someone's on a pedestal, they get a sense of untouchableness, and
Hmm.
like I never want anybody to be above reproach, above question, above criticism. So a hero to me is somebody who has gone out of their way to do something positive, to out of the way to make a difference, especially if it isn't something that will necessarily self-aggrandize. I saw a thing that I care about, and here's something that I decided to do. And I come across this all the time with my work. So I early on working for Good Thinking, there was somebody who had decided, as I had done previously, that people who say they're talking to the dead and are making large amounts of money out of that, if they can't prove that they are, that is exploitative. And he decided to start to print out some flyers that he'd written about basic cold reading techniques and to attend psychic shows and to stand outside giving people this kind of advice on how to spot cold reading should they see it while they're there. Very neutral kind of stuff. And while he was doing that, people from the psychics team came out and intimidated him and threatened him and said they were going to beat him up and were verbally abusing him and things. And rather than back down, which would have been very easy, he decided, well, I'm going to do more of this now. I'm going to go to every one of this psychic shows and do that. And then the psychic was starting to make legal threats towards him. And it would have been very easy to just stop at that point. But he decided, I'm going to try and get some representation and I'm going to stand up for myself in order to try and stand up for the truth. So that sort of thing is a hero to me because there is personal consequence there. There was potential cost. It was I accompanied him on some of those kind of events. And it was quite intimidating to have this person yelling abuse at you and yelling threats at you and saying they'll follow you back to the train and throw you under a train and things. It was quite scary, but he just had this strength of character to say, I believe in this thing and I'm going to carry on. And so when I meet people like that, and they come up all the time in this work, those are the people I think have qualities that are heroic. in that I am willing to pursue this thing because I know it's the right thing to do and because I want to make a positive difference to people's lives. So that for me is more heroic than if I was to say, oh, this person in this field wrote this book and I see him give lectures and he's amazing and I adore his work. I think that stuff is more likely to become hero worship or personality worship. And I feel uncomfortable about that sort of thing. So I think that those small acts of like the people who are willing to stand up for what they think is right and to pursue that wherever it goes and where even when it starts to look like there's a personal cost, that's heroic to me.
Yeah, and that is an awesome answer. And it also explains a lot more about your your hesitancy to like refer to yourself as a hero. As I was describing, you're trying to get out of the way of the bus, I'm trying to push you into the bus. It's like actually no, a better analogy for that is you're trying to get off the pedestal that it's like I'm trying to push you on. And having been someone who has been on a pedestal as like a recovery coach in some of these, I used to be a part of, I think it was one of the largest Christian sexual recovery and purity groups that it was all online. And I had a mentor with that. He helped me become a coach. I
Hmm.
became friends with a lot of these other coaches. And whenever a coach had a falling out, because we're all going to make mistakes.
Yeah.
We all do. And we all have those moments where we feel weak. We all have those moments where we're compromised in some way. And it's like we fall back into these bad habits and patterns, or we are influenced by the generosity or the care from others. And it was always traumatizing to the community when someone that they had emblemized as like this is the paragon of what it is to be in one of these groups, as soon as they fell off the pedestal, it was tragic. it
Yeah.
was it was traumatic. And so I want to specify that I think it's a fun word image to say that, I'm pushing you up on this pedestal and you're trying to like, push yourself off of it, and it's just like this tug of war and everything. Um, and at the same time, I also understand that we're all infallible in some
Hmm.
way. Um, no, fallible. We're all fallible in
We're
some
all
way.
fallible. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yes,
No one's
thanks.
infallible.
Whew, all right, I'm glad I corrected that one. Otherwise, that would be a soundbite people might take out of context. Yeah. Speaking about being fallible, I understand that we are all fallible. We all make mistakes, and for me, I don't want to put people up on a pedestal because I have been on that pedestal and know
Hmm.
how uncomfortable of a position that is. The scrutiny that people have you under, and it's like you have to be so careful about everything you do and say. Things could be taken out of context. And I was a part of this group when I started deconstructing my faith. And I felt like I had to be so careful with everything I said, because if I
Yeah,
said
yeah.
anything within this Christian community, if I said anything that sounded even remotely anti-Christian, or that I was no longer a Christian, I mean, the anxiety that I held for way too long. It was like 2 years that I was holding on to this before I finally stepped away. Um, it is very uncomfortable being on that pedestal. And so when I say that someone like you is a hero, when someone like my friend Brad Onishi from the Straight White American Jesus podcast, when I say he's a hero, Tori Williams Douglas, some of these other people that I have interviewed. In fact, you're not as unique as you might think you are about like not really having heroes,
Hmm.
because I think the last three people I've interviewed have all expressed similar sentiments where it's like I don't really look at people as like being heroic in some way.
Yeah.
So uh, uh, as I would say with some of the clients that I've worked with, helping them overcome, and a lot of them are Christian still, and trying to overcome this unwanted sexual behavior and everything. They there's just this thing of like how everyone else can be forgiven except for me, and I always have to
Mm.
look at them and say, what makes you so fucking special, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
And so Marsh, you're actually not as odd in that regard as you might think. Um, and it's been very fun having these conversations because it does challenge the notion of what it is to be a hero, what it is to be heroic. Uh, and so I 100% believe and think that you have done some very heroic things in your time, in the work that you do. I do consider you a hero just with what I have learned about you.
Mm.
And I'm not going to put you up on that pedestal because that's not where any of us belong.
Yeah,
We
I
we
agree.
we belong down here amongst everyone else. And it's almost like if you put someone up on that pedestal, then it's like they're really hard to reach unless they fall down.
Yeah,
And I don't
yeah.
want that. I really don't. So, as you're describing these people that recognize the consequences of the pushback that they're receiving from these different people and still being like, you know what, this is worth doing. This
Yes.
this is worth pursuing. This is worth speaking out against. That really is a heroic quality, and I 100% agree with you on that. And I want to thank you for verbalizing that with this question.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean it's very much how I feel. It's that thing of I think we're all equals. Everybody is just an equal. It's the ethos that QED has always had. There is no VIP section at QED. There is no green room for the speakers. There's no sense of celebrity. Everybody there are people. We can appreciate the work. We can salute the work. We can think the people are nice people, but we shouldn't have them on pedestals. We shouldn't see them as better than us, as greater, or we're all just people. And I think I fundamentally want to be the same. I want everybody to know that
Yeah.
we're all equal here. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So you'll probably have fun answering this next question. Who is an influential hero in your life, whether we're talking someone fictional or non-fictional?
Oh, I don't know if I will have fun with this question because it's really hard to pick out kind of influences, really. I mean, I
Well,
can give
that's
trite
why I was
answers.
saying you were going to have fun with it.
Yeah. So I mean, I think there's work out there that I really appreciate, and so someone like a skeptical activist who did a huge amount of great work. I can look at the work that James Randi did and say so many of the projects that he did, so many of the things that he delivered, so many of the investigations he did were pivotal skeptical investigations. I still feel odd heroizing
Mhm.
him because
Yeah.
he was also somebody who had incorrect opinions from time to time because he was human. And the moment we say
Yeah.
he's a hero, the moment we kind of make that gap to where he was wrong about stuff even greater. Similar with somebody like Joe Nickell. Joe Nickell was a fantastic skeptical investigator of the paranormal. And so, if you think of the biggest paranormal cases in the world, things like the Amityville horror or Mothman, things like that, he is the investigator who was there doing amazing work on the ground, figuring out what was going on. I can appreciate the work. I can look at that work and say, that is, when you define what skeptical investigating looks like, it looks like that. I'm not going to say he's a hero because, again, I'm sure if I sat down and talked to him, I mean, he passed away recently, relatively recently, but if I had sat down and have more conversations with him than I did, we might have found points of disagreement on political issues or social issues or whatever. So I can say the work is great, and I can say the interactions I had were great. I had a lovely time talking to Joe Nickell. I don't like calling someone a hero. So yeah,
Hmm.
those are people I would say are influential on my work. Um, yeah, I'd say that's probably the where I can go with that question
Yeah.
without getting too much into heroizing people, which obviously I struggle with so much.
Yeah. And just based on for those of you who are watching the video version on YouTube, you'll understand why I am posing this question. What about Spider-Man?
So I mean, I love Spider-Man. I grew up as a kid watching the '90s cartoons of Spider-Man. That's kind of was my in on Spider-Man, and I always saw. He was a character that kind of reflected things that I could appreciate as
Hmm.
much as anything else. I was always very scientific as a kid. I enjoyed the science of Spider-Man. I liked that they portrayed him as someone who solved things with his intelligence as much as the kind of skills he was given by a radioactive spider. And so
Yeah.
throughout my life, I've always enjoyed Spider-Man, which is why I have a lot of Spider-Man paraphernalia around me, and I'm not wearing a Spider-Man t-shirt today, but I often am. So yeah, he's a character whose heroic qualities I appreciate in fiction, in the the will to carry on trying to do the right thing as much as the world, as much as things go wrong and bad things happen to him, trying to self-sacrifice in order to make the world a better place. These are all things that I really do appreciate in a fictional hero, I'd say. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why I always give the caveat of fictional or non-fictional, because I do have a lot of protagonists that I have enjoyed their stories. And podcast listener, my friend, I am so sorry. This is going to be like the third time you've heard this story. Um, One of my favorite heroes is Cecil Harvey from the Final Fantasy IV video game.
Okay.
And this character has one of the most profound transformations where he goes from literally being a dark knight to being a paladin, like a holy knight. But he is betrayed by his best friend two times throughout the course of the story. And so for me, that is so important for us to recognize that you do have these people that have these incredible transformations that start off somewhere, and then with the help of allies and friends and mentors, they're able to transition into something better than they were, and yet they still make these mistakes. They
Mm.
still have like bad judgments that they make against people. They still will do or say something that is hurtful and wrong. And so, again, a big part of the work that I do with this is recognizing the entire human dynamic of what it is to be a hero. Heroes are those who are influential, who do this incredible work, and at the same time, they're fallible. They make mistakes. They have things in their past that they regret. They might even have some beliefs that are at odds with what you believe. And going back to what we've talked about, just the dynamic of heroes are those who are meant to be among us, not pedestalized,
Yeah, yeah.
is like the important thing for me.
Yeah, I mean, even so, if I pick another one from fiction, one of my favorite books is The Big Sleep, Raymond Chandler's detective noir story. And I think Philip Marlowe in The Big Sleep is that kind of hero that I appreciate because he isn't the strongest person, he isn't the smartest person, but he's the one who is willing to keep going and keep picking at the thread and keep following it where it goes, and knows that it would be easier to switch off at this point and just accept what he's been given, what he's been told, but feels like there's something he still needs to do. And even in spite of himself, where someone else would have stopped, he continues down the path and putting himself in the harm's way in order to figure out what's true because he just wants to understand what's really going on, kind of in spite of himself. So, and he's a deeply flawed character in lots of ways, but that doesn't stop him kind of getting towards truth. So, yeah, I think that's maybe another a good model because we don't need to have in detective fiction, you have the opposite side is like your Sherlock Holmes is this incredible, all encompassing brain who can tell everything, but is just so unrealistic because people aren't like that. And yes, he has flaws, but those flaws themselves are kind of esoteric rather than character flaws. So yeah, I prefer someone who feels like a normal human being who's just got a will to carry on going. So yeah, maybe that's the other hero I'd pick out is Philip Marlowe.
Well, and I appreciate you bringing that up because I just downloaded the audiobook on my Libby app on my
Oh,
phone.
cool.
As soon as you mentioned, it's like I've not heard of that one before, and I happen to see they had it available. It's like cool. I'm going to hear more about this character, so I'm excited to dive into it.
Oh, it's great. And the way it's written is it will read at times like cliche, but it's because it was one of the things that formed that cliche. So Raymond Chandler, along with the Maltese Falcon, whose name I'm in the middle of a conversation, so I've completely forgotten who wrote the Maltese Falcon.
Hmm.
But that style of literature that then became cliche were based on those early books, basically. So yeah,
Gotcha.
they're fantastic.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you giving me that recommendation, and it might end up being that after listening to this, I might have to add this character as like one that I research and do a hero study on as well.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I always pose this question is because I do get so many different insights into people that I can look into and share some of these heroic qualities because otherwise it's all going to be stuck to like video games and fantasy fiction novels and that kind of stuff because that's my jam.
Yeah. I
All
did
right.
remember. I had to look it up before I went crazy. Dashniel Hamnet wrote the Maltese Falcon, but I'm more of a Raymond Chandler guy.
Yeah, okay. I'm the same way. As soon as I'm in a conversation, the names just kind of fall out of my ears and it's like I can't grab them before it comes
Well,
time for me to speak.
I studied detective fiction as part of my English literature degree, so I had to kind of pull that back because I
Yeah.
know that was 20 years ago, but it would still have eaten at me if I hadn't have looked it up to check.
Oh, I know. And it's like as soon as the conversation is done is when you would remember the name and it's like, oh crap, why couldn't I have thought of it in the moment?
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Marsh. This is the final question that I have. Is there anything that you want to share with our friend that you didn't get to say yet?
Um, No, well, I suppose the thing I really wanted to get across was how important I find the compassionate aspects of what I do, and the fact that I don't think there's a barrier to it. And I think it's also something that I think we need to take into our conversations with people more generally. It's really easy for us to assume that the people we disagree with, to think the worst of them. But
Yeah.
actually, if we actually listen, we can still find out that they're wrong. We might find out that they're wrong and they have horrible opinions for horrible reasons, but we're more likely, in my opinion, to find that they're wrong. They may have horrible opinions for reasons that they can articulate and that are understandable. And I think we're far better at reaching people once we kind of really understand them. And I think it's always worth us making that effort to try, as long as the cost to us isn't so significant. As a straight white guy, it's very easy for me to say to be having these conversations. That's much harder if I'm marginalized in various different ways. But I think we kind of have to use our privilege in order to have to be in those spaces that other people would suffer more to be in. So yeah, I think those are the only things that I want to get across, and I hope I've got that across as we've been talking here. Really.
Yeah, I've definitely picked up on that, and you have spoken to two of the core principles of the Between the Covers podcast, the work that I kind of do, and that is the dynamic of curiosity and compassion.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
because you can be curious about something and not be compassionate and rub people the wrong way. You can say things that are going to push people away. You can have an open mouth, insert foot moment, unintentionally so. And if you have the compassion without the curiosity, then you're not actually getting to the root of where the beliefs are coming from. And you can miss so many dynamics of the story by
Yeah.
just having the compassion of like, I'm right here with you, I'm so sorry for all of this, but not actually without the curiosity, we are going to miss opportunities for us to grow.
Yeah, if you don't understand the hole you're in, you won't be able to get out. And if you don't understand the hole that and how people ended up in the hole that they're in, you won't be effective at helping them out. You've got to understand what it is that they think and why before you can help them question that, I'd say.
Absolutely. Oh man, Marsh, this was such an awesome conversation. I can't thank you enough for giving me this time.
Oh no, it was an absolute pleasure. It was so good to chat to you, Marcus.
Yeah, it really was. I enjoyed this, and I mentioned this in the beginning. Marsh has a lot of work in his catalog, and if you want to hear more from him, I mean, I can mention. the Skeptics with a K podcast. There's the No Rogan Experience. You can definitely check out the Good Thinking Society and the Merseyside Skeptics as well. And like for myself personally, I have absolutely enjoyed your appearances on god awful movies. And man, I don't know. Actually, I probably do know because I used to be someone who watched these movies, but
Mm.
I haven't watched them in like a skeptical sense or anything. The number of times that you have been brought on as a guest, I'm like, man, why does he keep coming back? He must really
It's
like these
so much
people.
fun. Yeah, I absolutely adore those people. They're so much fun, and it's such a fun project to be part of. So yeah, I love being
Yeah.
involved in all of the shows of theirs that I get involved in.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that I can systematically get like each of them on here as well to share their story.
Oh
But
yeah.
besides those, if anyone wanted to follow you and the work that you do, where could they go?
So I'm the editor of the Skeptic magazine, and so we put out original skeptical investigative journalism every day of the week from a compassionate skepticism direction. So you can go to skeptic.org.uk and subscribe there and things. And yeah, hopefully you'll enjoy the type of work that I'm encouraging there. I'm not the only one writing. There's lots and lots of different writers, and I'm the editor who brings all that together.
Awesome. Well, Marsh, again, I do want to respect your time because, it's just the start of my day and it's getting towards the end of yours there. But thank you so much for giving me this time and this opportunity to speak with you. I can't thank you enough for it.
Oh no, my absolute pleasure. It was great to meet you. Great to chat.
Awesome. So we will see who is going to be interviewed for the hero study for our next month. I have an idea, but I haven't actually reached out yet. It's going to be a fun one because it's going to be February, so we're going to be talking about love and that kind of stuff. So again, thanks so much to Marsh for being here, and I hope you guys have benefited as greatly from our conversation as I have. And we'll talk again with you next week. And until then, live strong for today.
Well, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.